Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we hope you're having a nice weekend, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, the Trump administration says it is ending what it calls a war on coal, but is it really regulations or is it market forces that are making it challenging for coal? Tyler White from the Kentucky Coal Association will be joining us shortly. But first, State Auditor Mike Harmon is here. The auditor released several audits this week, including one that revealed major problems in Jackson County. The FBI and state police are being asked to follow up after findings that the county treasurer may have pocketed more than $100,000. The audit also found other problems with the county's finances. Auditor Harmon is also being asked to conduct an in-depth forensic audit at Kentucky State University by the new president there. Hopefully he can update us on that this morning and on his examination of the expenditures of the Kentucky court system. State Auditor Mike Harmon joining us on Kentucky Newsmakers, and thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Glad to be here this morning, Bill.
Well, you released about a half dozen audits this week. And,
it's been a very busy week.
Right. One that got our attention, and let's get right to that, the findings in Jackson County. What was happening there that apparently was causing taxpayer dollars to go through a leaky bucket?
Sure. Well, we ended up doing both the 2015 and 2016 fiscal court audit, financial statement audit for the Jackson County Fiscal Court, and during that time frame we had a total of 75 findings, 35 the first year, 40 the second year, with 35 of those being repeats, and it was just really those are the largest number of findings that we have ever seen, or at least during my administration that we've ever seen. I don't even think we've had anything in our special exams, but there were so many major problems, it's kind of hard to see the trees for the forest, but some of the ones that really surfaced to the top, obviously there was over $114,000 over a 2-year period of improper payments that the treasurer made to herself. About half of that came from some federal funds, some CSEP funds. About the other half was just giving herself additional payroll checks. So for us, it was somewhat phenomenal that she would do that. Go ahead.
When you start investigating situations like this, are you surprised by the simplicity sometimes of schemes?
Yeah, I mean, some of them from the standpoint, in this particular case, she was just writing herself checks. Obviously, if it's a little more intricate, sometimes they're hard to find, but this one, it was just so simplistic what she was doing.
How are our county governments to try to look over these things themselves before it gets to the point that the money is gone and the state is coming in and finding that this has happened and then trying to potentially prosecute? Well,
part of the problem was there wasn't any checks and balances on this particular treasurer. I've jokingly said it was kind of like lack of segregation of duties on steroids. A lot of times we'll go into fiscal courts, or in some cases sheriffs and or county clerks, and if they have, now this particular case we had a ton of findings, but in some cases maybe if we have any finding at all, it may just be a lack of segregation of duties, and a lot of them they get frustrated with that, and sometimes they get so frustrated that eventually they take it lightly. But the problem is, if you take that lightly, if you don't have checks and balances, you may have the person that you trust the most, but if there's something that occurs in their life that maybe triggers either the need or the desire to have additional funds, well, if there's no checks and balance, you won't know that occurs until later on, after one of the audits that we've done.
I mean, it would seem simple, 2 signatures, for instance, these kinds of requirements, but those are sometimes not followed?
Those are not followed sometimes, from the standpoint, especially like some of our sheriff's offices are very small. They have a hard time actually having the actual segregation of duties. So what we indicate is if you don't have sufficient staffing, at least put in some compensating factors, where the sheriff or another deputy comes behind whoever's handling the money and make sure that have additional initial or check off, have people taking a look and balancing those checkbooks at the end of each month, etc.
So when you get a report like this, what do you do next?
Well, what we do next is we go ahead and refer it to law enforcement. In this particular case, we've referred it to the FBI, we've referred it to the Attorney General's office, we referred it to the state police. So we have referred it to multiple agencies. Some of the other ones we referred to one of the local ethics boards. We had some situations where at the jail, some of the employees were getting discounts that were not available to other people. We even had some of the staff was actually collecting personal rent payments for the previous judge executive. So there was just really no compensating factors at all.
And so you make recommendations to the localities as well as then the referrals to law enforcement?
Yes. You know, typically if we didn't have a law enforcement referral, of course we do this even with law enforcement, but you know, typically if we don't have a law enforcement referral, these findings hopefully will help, you know, fiscal courts or sheriff's office or county clerk's office be able to put themselves, you know, back on track. If someone's not intentionally you know, making improper payments to themselves, certainly we hope that they view these particular audits as a resource to put their office in the best shape that it can be.
Well, Auditor Harmon, Kentuckians are getting and paying their property tax bills right now.
Yes.
Do you feel that there are safeguards in place in most local governments to ensure that the money is secure and properly spent?
I think as a whole, most county governments are in pretty good shape from that standpoint, at least from, you know, the checks and balance of fiscal responsibilities. Unfortunately, you always have outliers. In this particular case, you know, Jackson County was, you know, a bit disappointing at how much they had collapsed in any type of checks and balances. But I would say, as we've had this discussion before, I think as a whole, most people want to do the right thing. Most elected officials want to do the right thing. Sometimes they need to make sure they can access the proper resources. But as a whole, I think they're good. But as you've seen, we do have findings on various audit reports that we release.
And that's why you do what you do.
And that's why we do what we do.
Kentucky State University has a new president in charge. He came in, he's looked at the books, has some concerns about, particularly with the overturn in personnel there,
Sure.
In the turnover over the last few years with several presidents and several CFOs in recent years. He is asking for a forensic audit, which is a major undertaking.
It is, and we actually had a meeting this week, myself and some of my staff and some of the staff at KSU, and we had some discussions, and basically what we'll do is we'll take that information from that discussion. We may ask for a little bit more, and then in the next month or two we'll decide how to proceed. That doesn't mean that we'll necessarily kick something off immediately, but we'll certainly take that information and try to figure out how we're going to proceed with that.
Likely that you will do an audit there?
We will probably do something. We haven't made a determination specifically what we will do. But given that you know, KSU is very important to the state, we'd want to make sure that anything that we can do to help them get on track, we would want to be supportive in that.
You've done a major look at the Administrative Office of the Courts, which essentially runs the court system and these judicial centers all around the Commonwealth. Where is all of that?
We're still in the middle of it. We've had people over there gathering data. They're reviewing the data now. As you know, I've said all our auditors, you know, when I first got there, we don't target anybody, we don't give anybody a pass, we just follow the data. So that's kind of our motto. And so they've got that data, they're reviewing it. They may need to go back and, you know, do some additional questions as well as review some additional data, but we're right in the middle of it. So we
keep having revelations out of the University of Louisville
yes.
and what's going on there, and that you know, goes back to a forensic audit that you released earlier in the year.
Well, we did the governance audit.
Yeah.
We did the governance audit, and then U of L, and of course we supported it. U of L actually paid for a forensic audit, and typically a forensic audit is more as if you're looking potential for prosecution. In our governance audit, of course, we were looking at the relationship both with the foundation and the University of Louisville, and many of our recommendations, once we had that governance audit, they actually put in place, or governance exam, they went ahead and put in place. So hopefully that will help it. Obviously, there's still stuff popping up all over the place, but yeah, I think hopefully once they get things leveled out, hopefully they can eventually get back on track. I know it's frustrating to students. I'm sure it's frustrating to people throughout the state because the University of Louisville is a very important part of the state.
Fair to say you continue to keep a close eye on what's happening there?
We continue to watch. I mean, obviously we intersected with the University of Louisville twice, once when we did the governance audit and once when we did the audit of the Louisville Arena Authority, basically the Yum Center. And so we've done two so far, and obviously we didn't do the governance audit, but we did, you know, take a look at it when it came out.
By virtue of your position as state auditor, you sit on the Pension Oversight Board.
Yes.
And dealing with Kentucky's various pension systems and shortfalls is going to be a tall task, obviously, and the legislature is looking at this right now. Do you think enough is done to know enough about how the funds are invested and handled so that people who work for state government can feel secure about their retirements?
Well, I think we've done a lot. You know, one of the things that I campaigned on and the governor campaigned on as well was we wanted a performance audit. Now, the auditor's office does what's known as a financial statement audit every 4 years. You know, or yeah, I think once every 5 years for the different pension systems, and then they have a financial statement every year. Other than that, but what we wanted was a performance audit, just as you said, knowing how they had performed and things like that. Well, the governor put money in the budget, and PFM did do that. They released, you know, their particular findings. Not to say, and even the governor and the General Assembly said they're not necessarily going to follow all of those findings or those recommendations, but it was a good starting point. Everything I'm hearing, of course, I'm not in the General Assembly anymore, even though it's 13 years, but everything that I'm hearing is that they're trying to craft a plan that's best for everybody. From everything that I've been told is, you know, those that retired early, intentionally, you know, retiring early to avoid any type of plan, may not necessarily be disappointed, but they may find that they, you know, retired early when they didn't necessarily need to. And so I'll be curious to see myself. Obviously, whatever they do, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting there. There's a lot of interest, but to remain the status quo is just not going to work, because if they don't do something, both in, you know, trying to improve the current system, as well as, you know, they're probably going to have to look to find some additional funding. The pension system won't be there for anybody. And nobody wants that. I mean, promises are made, promises need to be kept, and so I look forward to seeing what they come out. And obviously, as you indicated, I sat on the Public Pension Oversight Board, so I've probably been privy to more information than a lot of people.
A long-term situation, though.
Long-term, I think anything that they do is going to definitely take probably about 30 years to dig out, maybe a little bit longer. Basically, if you can cap some of the problems that we're having going forward, you know, if you move most people to a 401k, not the ones that are in the system currently, but, you know, those moving forward, maybe even reach back to the tier 3. There's 3 tiers of that particular pension system. I think if you do that and then you amortize almost like a mortgage, you know, over a 30-year period, a fixed dollar, they're looking to do fixed dollar as opposed to a percentage of payroll. I think we can eventually dig out.
All right. I'm sure you have some busy months ahead closing out the year.
We do have some busy months ahead.
All right. State Auditor Mike Harmon, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, and you're keeping us updated. And stay with us now. Coming up next, the president of the Kentucky Coal Association joining us after a week in which the Trump administration announced it is abandoning some planned tougher emissions regulations. We'll be back on WKYT. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Many in the coal industry are applauding a decision by Kentucky native and EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt that the Trump administration is abandoning the Clean Power Plan. Many coal advocates and Kentucky politicians have said it means a war on coal is being abandoned by the Trump administration. And some point to new glimmers of hope for coal that was once a major Kentucky employer. But will rolling back regulations that were not set to take effect until 2022 be a boost to an industry that has seen declines for decades? And could coal be made to burn cleaner if the government would invest in making that happen? Tyler White is here from the Kentucky Coal Association, and we appreciate him coming in very much. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks,
you
Bill.
were there for that major announcement earlier this week. It was made first in the heart of coal country in Hazard by the EPA administrator. Tell us about that day.
Well, it was great that Senator McConnell given us the opportunity to bring Kentucky native back home. Many people don't know that Administrator Pruitt actually grew up here in Lexington and went to Lafayette High School. He actually played baseball there and went on to UK to play baseball, and then went to Georgetown College where he continued his baseball career. And I think he even had a small stint with the Reds for a little bit. So it was good to have somebody that understands our values and understands Kentucky to be in the position that he's in. And it was really neat to see him in the heart of coal country making the announcement that he made for his plans to repeal the Clean Power Plan.
What do you think the effect of this will be?
Number one is this is a huge step in the right direction. When we talk about the war on coal, it's important to know that it was a multi-agency, multi-prong attack. Everything from the Department of Energy to the Department of Interior to the EPA. So there were multiple rules put into place, and these were one of those rules that was put into place by this administration that would essentially have devastated the ability for us to generate power using coal, because the emissions regulations were so strict that a coal-fired power plant couldn't compete without having investments made to that plant to make it more efficient.
The rules weren't in place yet. It was supposed to be 2022 when this was to happen. How does that have an effect now?
Well, this is a very interesting point about what's gone on with this. We believe, and many people believe, we also believe that the Supreme Court recognized this, that the Clean Power Plan, which had not gone into effect, was also illegal, meaning that it did not meet the legal criteria that's set forth by the Clean Air Act. Now, the Clean Air Act was something that was put to law by Congress. We went through the whole legislative process. The Clean Power Plan, however, was not. This was something that came from bureaucrats, non-elected bureaucrats in D.C. that worked for the EPA. This was legally challenged by multiple industries and multiple businesses, saying that the EPA did overstep their bounds by creating such a stringent guideline that essentially picked winners and losers in how we generate electricity here in America. That argument went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court put a stay on the Clean Power Plan. Now we'll go back, and what we believe Administrator Pruitt will do is he'll rewrite this rule to conform or to be underneath the legal parameters of the Clean Air Act. And the difference between what we have when the Supreme Court stayed the Clean Power Plan and what we have now when they will get, because surely the replacement for the Clean Power Plan will be challenged by different groups, different industry groups, and it will go to the Supreme Court.
What do you say to those who say that the ship has sailed, that the utility companies have converted, they have changed, they get cheaper natural gas, and that's what they're now depending on, and that they are unlikely to go back and reconvert those plants and return to coal as their source of power?
Well, what I'm going to say is I'm going to finish up on this first thought of that when this thing is challenged again and it goes to the Supreme Court, we actually have a full bench. And we believe that the way that the bench is situated right now, that this will be codified, meaning that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of whatever this replacement is, which is not what happened, of course, with Obama's Clean Power Plan. We believe that will return some certainty to the marketplace. That will give people at least the ability to understand what parameters they're going to have to operate within, and that they're not having to bounce back and forth from another administration if they were to come in and look to change the rule. That just won't be a possibility. What do I say to people about the ship has sailed? 30% of our nation's energy is still produced by coal, and what you're going to hear a lot about is resiliency in our grid. And coal is what we call a base load power. We can store 90 days of fuel source next to that plant, and we know that we have 90 days of fuel. When you have natural gas, cheap natural gas, it's just-in-time power, meaning as soon as it gets into that power plant, it burns. If there's a disruption within that supply line, you don't have electricity. We believe that coal and nuclear, any baseload power, is essential, and you'll hear this a lot from the Department of Energy, is essential to the reliability and resiliency of our grid for things that happen like the polar vortex. Remember in 2014, without our coal power fleet, there would have been a catastrophic brownouts within the U.S. that coal-fired fleet is essential to making sure that we are able to generate in those peak demand times.
How concerned are you about creating the image of any kind of false hope? Coal demand has been going down for years, as you know. Is the problem these regulations, or is it these market forces that have caused a downturn that has been somewhat steady since 1979 or so?
So I would say it's both. It definitely doesn't help when you have policies being put out there by Washington that create a more unfavorable environment for our industry in the energy mix. However, with that being said, there is a market factor to all of this too. But it isn't the market factor alone that caused the damage that it did within the coal industry. And the reason that we're seeing, and the reason I can say that is because for the first time in about 8 years, we have seen production finally start to flatline. We lost 28% of coal production in Kentucky in 2016 alone. That 1 year we dropped 28% in our production. And this year, for the first time in a long time, we've seen it flatline. And we believe that is because we are not being attacked by bureaucrats in Washington or an anti-coal agenda. And to people that say that there is not an anti-coal agenda, the day after this, the administrator made the announcement to rescind the Clean Power Plan, Michael Bloomberg announced $64 million, another $64 million, which brings his total investment in the war on coal over $150 million. But announced another $64 million to keep the war on coal alive. And at that point, we really need to be looking at, is that a market force? No, that's not a market force.
How concerned is the coal industry about the environment and burning coal more cleanly? And could the government, in your view, should the government do more to invest in clean coal technology?
Absolutely. And I'm not just saying it's a government's responsibility. I think we should be. I think our utilities should be investing in this if the government gives them the tools to do so. So one of the things that we need to look at is new source review, making sure that we give the utilities the ability to look at their existing plant and say, hey, we can, under law, make modifications to this plant to make it more efficient. I also think it's important that we have some of the cleanest emissions that we've had in 40 years. And this would have done nothing to combat global emissions. And a lot of this Clean Power Plan was brought about by the Paris Accord, which really really handicapped and handcuffed the American energy production, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the world with what we were going to do and what they were going to do.
With Tyler White, who is here from the Kentucky Coal Association after the major announcement this week from the Trump administration regarding coal. We're going to come back in a moment. We'll hear some other perspectives, and we'll have more with President White in just a moment. We welcome you back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers as we continue to discuss this announcement this week by the Trump administration that they will be abandoning the so-called Clean Power Plan and will be abandoning what is also the so-called war on coal. Now, we talked to some other folks to get some different perspectives, including a coal operator, an environmentalist, as well as Congressman Hal Rogers. We want to hear from them quickly.
It'll be difficult because a lot of the plants already have switched to gas and perhaps other sources. So it's going to be a hard climb back. But this at least will take care of the major stumbling block, I think, for us getting back into the coal mining business.
So by withdrawing that rule, it gives us hope. We all know it was illegal, and now we've got an administration that is going to enforce the rule of law.
If we have the opportunity to have cleaner energy and also produce more jobs, then to me this is a no-brainer, and why are we interfering with that trend?
So the interesting debate, no doubt, will go forward. Mr. White, as some leaders and businesses in the Appalachian coal fields have been urged continuously to work hard to develop other alternatives for the economy, to get some other things going in eastern Kentucky and the mountains, what do they do now? Do they, are they to believe that jobs are suddenly going to return in the coal fields?
Well, Bill, that's a great question. One thing that I always like to say is we need to put our miners back to work. We had 10,000 unemployed miners that were displaced over Obama's presidency. But the important thing to realize about those 10,000 people is it is one of the highest skilled workforces in America. You're talking about work ethic. They might not have a college degree, but guess what they do have? They have PhDs in engineering. In real world engineering. So I think it's important that we understand that it's important to diversify. Listen, our production is not going up, and especially in Eastern Kentucky, I don't foresee it skyrocketing in the near future. And our industry, just like every other industry, becomes more and more efficient as we progress with time and technology. These are highly technical jobs, so we will not need the same amount of people to mine coal as we once did. So therefore, I think it's imperative that that communities look to diversify their economies. But I say that coal is a way to do that. And why is coal a way to do that? Because we are an efficient industry and we can produce the amount of clean, affordable electricity at a way and a rate that our neighbors can't do. And through those low electricity rates, we should be able to attract industry that allows us to diversify our economy and put this workforce back to work.
So interestingly, at the end of the week in which you believe you have won a major victory, your work is far from over at the Kentucky Coal Association.
Absolutely. This is, again, this is one of those regulations that yet had not been into effect. It's just another way to create the optimism and pave the road for future investment to help preserve our coal fleet and make sure that our grid stays resilient.
Tyler White, thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We certainly hope you make it a good week ahead.